Just over the past week, we've been hearing nothing more of relentless attacks on Gary Lineker. And recently, over the last couple of days, he was told to step back from his role as a Match of the Day pundit as well. All of a sudden, things have changed today. As of right now, Gary Lineker will be back in his role as a Match of the Day sports presenter. But how did this all happen in the first place? What does this mean for the BBC? What does this mean for the Conservative Party? Well, we're going to dive into all these details, why this happened, and why hasn't anybody else suffered the same thing? Let's go. Gary Lineker hails phenomenally tolerant UK as he's reinstated at the BBC after a row over the migration treaties. The BBC apologised for the episode and announces it's an independent review into its social media guidelines, while Lineker thanks Director General Tim Davie for his understanding during this difficult period, adding that he had an almost impossible job keeping everybody happy. The BBC has apologised. Sky Sports News understand that the BBC had also apologised privately to Gary Lineker. In a series of tweets, Lineker said, "After a surreal few days, I'm delighted that we have navigated a way through this, and I want to thank you all for your incredible support, particularly my colleagues at the BBC Sport for their remarkable show of solidarity. Football is a team game, but their backing was overwhelming." He continued, "However difficult over the last few days it has been, it simply doesn't compare to having to flee your home from persecution or war to seek refuge in a land far away. It's heartwarming to seeing the empathy towards their plight from so many of you. We remain a country of predominant tolerance, welcoming and generous people." Lineker also thanked the BBC Director Tim Davie for his understanding during this difficult period, adding that he had an almost impossible job of keeping everybody happy, particularly the area of impartiality. "I'm delighted that we will continue the fight for good fight together," the former England footballer continued. Meanwhile, Mr Davies said everyone recognises that this has been a difficult period for staff, contributors, presenters and, most importantly, our audience. "I apologise for this. The potential confusion has caused by the grey areas of the BBC's social media guidelines was introduced in 2020 as recognised, and I want to get the matters resolved so that our sport content back on the air. Impartiality is important to the BBC, and it is also important to the public. The BBC has a commitment to its impartiality on its charter and a commitment to the freedom of expression. That is a difficult balance to act where people are subject to different contracts on air positions and different audiences on social media profiles. The BBC's social media guidance is designed to help manage those difficult challenges, and I'm aware that their need to ensure that the guidance is up to task. It should be clear, proportionate and appropriate. Accordingly, we are announcing a review led by the independent expert, according to the BBC, on an existing social media guidance with a particular focus on how it applies to freelancers outside news and current affairs. The BBC and myself are aware that Gary is in favour of such a review." Shortly, the BBC will announce who will conduct the review. Whilst the work is undertaken, the BBC's social media guidance remains in place. Gary is a valuable part of the BBC, and I want to know how much the BBC means to Gary, and I look forward to him presenting our coverage this coming weekend. The BBC board also welcomed the agreement, saying, "Impartiality is a cornerstone of the BBC, and we believe it is the right time to look at the clarity of the BBC social media guidance and how it's applied. We will continue to support the executive in this continuing work to ensure that the organisation delivers world-class impartiality content for all audiences." The board is chaired by Richard Sharp, who had previously received criticism for allegedly facilitating an £800,000 loan for Boris Johnson in the weeks before his appointment in the corporation was approved. But Labour leader Keir Starmer said before the announcement about Lineker's return that Mr Sharp's position is increasingly untenable. He said, "I think most people watching the complete mess of the last few days would have said, how on earth is he still in position? And Gary Lineker has been taken off air. This is a mess of the BBC's own making, and he needs to sort it out, and sort it out fast." It follows a chaotic few days which saw reduced football coverage across the BBC over the weekend as pundits, commentators and other staff refused to work in protest of Lineker's removal from the show. Lineker was criticised by the Conservative politicians after comparing the language used in the government's new asylum policy with 1930s Germany. On Friday, the BBC announced that Lineker would step back from hosting the weekly football highlight programme. However, the corporation's decision sparked a backlash, with pundits such as Ian Wright and Alan Shearer for refusing to appear on the show, with several other footballers, presenters, pundits and commentators following suit. Saturday's night Match of the Day 2 aired for just 20 minutes, without commentary, pundit analysis, post-match interviews and its theme music. But the disruption to the BBC Sport coverage went beyond the flagship show. Match of the Day 2's coverage was just 15 minutes long after Jermaine Defoe said he would not appear on air. On BBC Two, the Women's Super League Chelsea vs Manchester United match was aired with no pre-match presentation and no pundits. BBC Radio 5 Live was also affected as it replaced its usual live sports coverage over the weekend with pre-recorded content. What an extraordinary moment this has been for Gary Lineker and the BBC. An extraordinary circumstances of events, wouldn't you agree? It is quite incredible that in the space of a week how things have dramatically changed. Remember, the Conservative Party have been pretty much been digging their heels inside the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, as we well know. Its chairman, as we just saw, Mr Sharp there, who allegedly had taken £800,000 from Boris Johnson. Again, these are only allegations, but it's still questions to be rightly heard. And also, there's lots of more other people inside the corporation that have links to the Conservative Party. This has been going on for years now, which puts to question the legality and the basis that the BBC are considered a fair and biased news outlet, pretty much. But also, this just compounds even more things. Last week as well, David Attenborough was scheduled to have a show on air on TV as well, I believe. That was also pulled, and it's only allowed on the BBC iPlayer if you really want to go out of your way to watch something by Sir David Attenborough. Why on earth would they want to do all this? Clearly, when you think about it, when you think about it, this was completely and totally unnecessary. It was completely unfair on Gary, completely unfair on these people who simply just want to present Match of the Day, present the football / soccer in America for people to watch. And Gary Lineker is perfectly entitled to tweet whatever he likes, as long as he follows the guidelines on Twitter. And under his contract, he can say whatever he likes, when working for the BBC, because he's a freelancer. And whatever he tweets, the BBC can't do anything about, regardless of whatever the political differences is. It's funny how Gary Lineker was treated here indifferently, as opposed to, let's say, Lord Sugar, who has a show on the BBC called The Apprentice, and he's very conservative, and he can say whatever he likes. Andrew Neil is also another links conservative. He can tweet whatever he's like, and when people were challenging them, the BBC responds by, on social media, their impartiality is not to be asked to be bothered. And again, where does the line go? You have to ask yourself these questions. I feel incredibly sorry for Gary Lineker. He got riles of abuse, probably even death threats. This was completely unfair on his family and his friends and pundits alike. This is completely and totally unnecessary, all this was. But at the end of the day, the BBC did the right thing and backed down. It should have ended on Thursday, where they stated on Thursday that there was nothing wrong with what Gary Lineker had done. Even though the tweets were considered quite strong, at the end of the day, it was impartiality, and he could say whatever he wanted. But pressure from the Conservative MPs, allegedly, had pressured the BBC into doing more. So we've heard. The tweet from Gary Lineker comparing the anti-immigration bill goes back as far back to 1930s Germany. The language and slurs that were used back then are becoming a lot more of what this Conservative Party is doing. It's definitely questions that we need to answer. But what do you guys think? Do you think that the BBC were right to do this? Should more have been done? Let me know in the comments section what you guys think. And have a wonderful